Hello students, how are you all? I just hope that you all are fit and fine. And I also hope that you all must be studying at home. Now students, let's continue chapter number 2. Earlier in the chapter I told you about the structure of a flower and parts of a flower. Okay. Now today you are going to learn about pollination, its types. Also you are going to study about the fertilization. Okay. So let's get started. Now students, the first question is define pollination. That means what is pollination? Now pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same or another flower. Now here pollen grains, what are these pollen grains? Pollen grains, they are the tiny structures that are present in anther. Now anther is the male reproductive part and it contains powdery substance, and these powdery substances, they contain pollen grains. Okay, and pollen grains, what they contain? They contain male reproductive cells. Okay, now when these pollen grains from anther, when they transfer here to the stigma, this stigma is the female reproductive part. So when pollen grains from anther, they transfer here to the stigma, then this is known as pollination. And pollination also occurs within the flower, okay, same flower, or between another flower of the same plant also, like this. Okay, so this is known as pollination. Now then comes, what are the two types of pollination, and you have to explain them also. So here the answer is, the two types of pollination are, first one is self-pollination. Now what is the self-pollination? It is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. Just now I told you that when pollen grains from anther, they transfer here to the stigma of the same flower, then this is known as self-pollination. Okay, or self-pollination is also transfer of pollen grains from anther to the another flower, okay, to the stigma of the another flower of the same plant. Okay, so this is also known as self-pollination. Then comes second is cross-pollination. Now what is this cross-pollination? It is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of a flower of one plant to the stigma of a flower of another plant, okay, of the same type. Now here you can see that this is self-pollination, just now I told you. Now cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the another flower of another plant, like this. This is self when it is within the flower of same plant, and cross is within the flower of another plant, like this, here, like this. Okay, this is the anther, and when anther of this plant, anther of this flower of this plant, when it transfer here to the stigma of another flower of another plant, then it is called cross pollination. Okay, so this is the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination. Comes question number 3. Name the 3 main agents of dispersal. Okay. Now, just now I told you about pollination and types of pollination. Now, cross-pollination, what it needs? It needs dispersal of pollen grains from anther of one flower to another flower of another plant. Okay, now for this there are many agents of dispersal. Okay. Now these agents can be insects, it can be wind, it can be water, it can be animals, it can be humans also. Okay. But we are discussing here the three main agents of pollen grains. Okay. Pollen grains, they transfer from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of another plant by these agents. These agents are insects, wind and water. Okay. So the three main agents of dispersal are pollination by insects or dispersal by insects. So insects like bees, honey bees, like butterflies, these insects, what they do, they transfer pollen grain from one flower to the stigma of another flower. Okay. So here what happens, that when insects, they visit, when butterflies or honeybees, when they visit flowers for nectar or honey. Now nectar, you know what is nectar? Nectar is the sugary liquid which is present in the flower. Okay. So when an insect sits on the flower of a plant for sucking nectar, then the pollen grains from the anther of this flower stick to its body. Okay. Then and now when this insect sits on another flower to suck nectar, then the pollen grains sticking to its body are transferred to the stigma of the second flower. Okay. So in this way the insects transfer pollen grains from flower to flower and carry out pollination. Okay. Now insect pollinated flowers are dahlia, rose and sunflower. Okay. Now comes pollination by wind. Now the blowing wind, it also carries pollen grains. Pollen grains, they are very light. Okay. So the blowing wind, what it does, it carries pollen grains from one flower to other flowers and thus it helps in pollination. Now wind pollinated flowers are wheat, maize, rice, sugarcane. Okay. Then comes pollination by water. Now pollination by water also plays an important role in carrying pollen grains from one place to another. Okay. And it mainly happens, this type of pollination, it occurs mainly in water plants like hydrilla and Vallisneria. Okay. Then comes question number 4. Give differences between insect pollinated and wind pollinated flowers. Now insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers, they have got some differences. What are they? Number 1, insect pollinated flowers, they are large and they are bright colored. Okay, like sunflowers, rose. And then you have this hibiscus. Now wind pollinated flowers. Wind pollinated flowers, they are small and inconspicuous. Now what does it mean, inconspicuous? It means they are unattractive, unlike insect pollinated flowers. Okay, because insect pollinated flowers, they are attractive because they are large and brightly colored, but wind pollinated flowers, they are small and they are unattractive. Then insect pollinated flowers, they have nectar and scent, but wind pollinated flowers, they do not have nectar or scent. Okay. Now wind insect pollinated flowers, here pollen grains, they are very sticky. Okay. And in wind pollinated flowers, pollen grains, they are dry. Now insect pollinated flowers, here pollen grains, they are produced in very less quantity, but here in wind pollinated flowers, pollen grains, they are produced in large quantity. Okay, so these are the differences between the two. Now students, open your book, open page number 12. Test yourself. Okay, I've given this exercise for homework. Now let us confirm the answers now. Okay, so the first is multiple choice questions. You have to put tick to the correct choice. Okay, now here we have the first one. The carpel consists of, the answer is style, stigma and ovary. So put a tick mark over here. B1, option B. Now second is pollen grains are produced in, they are produced in anthers. C, option C, put a tick mark over here. Now third is calyx consists of, answer is sepals. Okay, calyx is sepals, green leafy structure or green leafy part is known as calyx. Okay, so question number 4 here is flowers having both male and female reproductive parts, they are called bisexual. Okay, option A, put a tick mark over here. Now fill in the blanks. The 4 whorls of a flower, whorls, you know, parts of a flower or layers of a flower are calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. Now students, kindly write correct answer and write correct spelling of the parts or whorls of a flower: calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. Okay, now second is pollen grains are produced in anthers, anthers. Third is the ovary contains ovules, ovules, ovules. Okay, then these question answers you all have done. Now this one is find the odd one out, and you have to write answer reason also. The first is, now we have here style, ovary, filament, stigma. Now the odd one here is the filament, because style, ovary and stigma, they are female reproductive parts. Okay, so the first the filament here is the male reproductive part, so filament is the odd one out. Now the second is root, petals, sepals, ovary. Here root is odd one out because others they are petals, sepals, ovary. These are the parts of a flower or whorls of a flower, while root is a part of a plant. Okay, so kindly check your answers and match your answers with my answers. Okay.